Look at this legal contract. To you, it looks like a shield. To the system, it is a death warrant for your wealth. While the world was distracted watching China outsmart the United States and Venezuela without firing a single shot, you missed the silent seizure happening right in your own backyard. Your assets, your home, your legacy. They are no longer yours. They are merely on loan, waiting for the state to reclaim them. Most advisors will look you in the eye and tell you that a U.S. domestic trust is bulletproof. They are lying. I am here to reveal the legal mechanism that transforms your trusted representative into your greatest liability. Here is the contradiction that should keep you awake tonight. Your lawyer is an officer of the court first, and your advocate second. Their primary oath is to the government, not to you. When the system faces an existential threat, they don't just betray you by choice, they betray you by mandate. The 2026 emergency decrees are already drafted. If your wealth is sitting inside the American legal cage when the clock strikes midnight, it is already gone. Do not be outsmarted by a system designed to harvest your life's work. Build the Swiss Firebreak before the gates close forever. Let's look at the secret Venezuela left behind. To understand why you have been outsmarted, we must first look at the person sitting across the mahogany desk from you, your attorney. You pay them hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars an hour to be your shield. You tell them your secrets. You hand them the keys to your legacy. You believe in a concept called attorney-client privilege. You think it is an unbreakable vault. But today, I am going to show you the cracks in that vault that are large enough to sink your entire estate. The first thing they teach in law school is not how to protect the client. It is how to serve the system. In the United States, every lawyer is granted a license by the state. This license is not a right, it is a privilege. And that privilege comes with a hidden price tag that most wealthy families never bother to read. Your lawyer carries a title that you probably find comforting: Officer of the Court. To you, Officer of the Court sounds like someone with authority and prestige. To the government, it means something entirely different. It means that your lawyer is a subordinate member of the judicial branch. It means their primary loyalty is not to you, the person paying the bill, but to the court and the sovereign state that issued their bar license. This is the ultimate paradox of the American legal system. You are paying for an advocate who is legally mandated to be a double agent when the interests of the state collide with your private property. Think about that for a moment. If the government issues an emergency decree, much like we saw during the early stages of the Venezuela Secret, your lawyer is faced with a choice. They can protect your assets and risk losing their license, their livelihood, and their freedom. Or they can comply with the court's order to disclose your holdings, freeze your accounts, and hand over the keys to your trust. In every historical instance of a wealth seizure, from the gold confiscation of 1933 to the modern-day collapse of private property in Caracas, the lawyers were the first to fold. They did not do it because they were evil people. They did it because they had no choice. They were officers of the court first, and your protector second. Let us look at the mechanics of this betrayal. Most high net worth individuals in America rely on what is known as a domestic asset protection trust. You are told these structures are ironclad. You are told that as long as the trust is irrevocable, the state cannot touch it. This is a fairy tale told to keep you compliant. Because your trust is domestic, it exists within the reach of a U.S. judge's pen. And because your lawyer is an officer of the court, that judge does not need to break into your vault. The judge simply orders your lawyer to open it for them. If your lawyer refuses, they are in contempt of court. They go to jail. Their career ends. Do you honestly believe that a person who spent 7 years in higher education and built $1 million practice is going to go to a federal prison for your bank account? History says no. In Venezuela, before the total collapse, the elite thought they were safe because they had the best lawyers in the country. What they didn't realize was that the regime didn't need to fight the elite. They simply co-opted the legal profession. They turned the lawyers into administrative arms of the state. This is the silent betrayal. It doesn't happen with a loud knock at the door. It happens in a quiet boardroom where your attorney, with a heavy heart and a scripted apology, tells you that their hands are tied. They will tell you they are required by law to cooperate. They will cite compliance regulations or anti-money laundering statutes. But the simple truth is that they are protecting their own skin. They are choosing their bar license over your family legacy. You have been outsmarted because you are playing a game where your teammate is actually employed by the opposing captain. When the economic winds shift and the 2026 emergency decrees are enacted to stabilize the national debt, your domestic legal team will become the government's most efficient harvest tool. They know where every dollar is hidden. They drafted the documents. They hold the records. And as officers of the court, they are legally obligated to hand them over when the state of emergency is declared. Attorney-client privilege is not a shield against the state. It is a privilege that the state allows you to have, until it doesn't. There are dozens of exceptions to this privilege that the average person never hears about. The crime-fraud exception is one that is being expanded every single year. All it takes is a single allegation from a government agency to pierce the veil of your private conversations. Once that veil is pierced, your lawyer is no longer your confidant. They are a witness for the prosecution. The secret of Venezuela was not just about socialism or oil. It was about the total neutralization of the legal profession. When the courts became a weapon of the state, the lawyers had to choose: become a victim or become a tool. Most chose to be a tool. They helped facilitate the nationalization of private companies. They helped identify hoarded wealth. They did it all while wearing expensive suits and using sophisticated legal terminology. The same framework is already in place in the United States. We have seen the weaponization of the IRS. We have seen the expansion of the Patriot Act. We have seen the introduction of unexplained wealth orders in other Western jurisdictions. These are not coincidences. They are the building blocks of a global harvest system. And your local lawyer, no matter how much you like them, is a cog in that machine. So what is the chualan, the healing, from this realization? It is not to fire your lawyer and try to do it yourself. That is a recipe for disaster. The healing comes from moving the jurisdiction of your life's work beyond the reach of the officer of the court mandate. It comes from realizing that a domestic shield is just a painted piece of wood. If you want a shield made of titanium, you must look where the court's pen cannot reach. By the end of this video, you will understand that sovereignty is not something that is given to you by a government-licensed professional. Sovereignty is something you take by positioning yourself where the betrayal of a lawyer is no longer an option. We are going to look at why irrevocable in America actually means flexible for the government, and how the 2026 decrees are being designed to turn your legal representative into your worst nightmare. You have been outsmarted for years. But the fact that you are listening to this means the game is not over yet. You still have the power to change the board. But first, you must accept the cold, hard truth. In the eyes of the law, your lawyer does not work for you. They work for the house. And as the old saying goes, the house always wins. Unless, of course, you stop playing in their casino. To truly understand how you are being outsmarted today, we must look at the most sophisticated wealth harvesting operation of the 21st century. I am talking about the Venezuela Secret. Most people think Venezuela collapsed because of simple socialism or a drop in oil prices. They think it was a chaotic riot in the streets. They are wrong. The collapse of the Venezuelan elite was a masterclass in legal precision. It was an orderly, lawyer-led transition of private wealth into state hands. And the terrifying truth is, the blueprint they used in Caracas is currently being translated into English for the American market. In the late 1990s, Venezuela was the crown jewel of South America. It was a land of luxury cars, country clubs, and massive private estates. The wealthy families of Caracas didn't fear the government. Why should they? They had the best legal minds money could buy. They had their assets tucked away in domestic trusts and holding companies that they believed were untouchable. They thought they were the smartest people in the room. But they were outsmarted by a regime that understood one thing better than they did: The law is not a shield for the citizen. It is a weapon for the sovereign. The Venezuela Secret began with something called the Law of Enabling Acts. It was a series of emergency decrees that granted the executive branch the power to bypass traditional legislative hurdles in the name of national stability and social justice. Does that sound familiar? It should. Because every major financial crisis in history is preceded by the word stability. When the state claims it needs to stabilize the economy, what it really means is that it needs to harvest your balance sheet to pay for its own failures. In Caracas, the lawyers didn't protest these decrees. They facilitated them. They were told that to keep their bar licenses, they had to ensure their clients were in compliance with the new social mandate. One by one, the wealthy were summoned to their lawyers' offices. They were told that their domestic trusts were being re-evaluated. They were told that for the good of the nation, their assets needed to be registered in a central state database. And because their lawyers were officers of the court, they provided the roadmap for the seizure. This is the mirror we must look into. Today, the United States is facing a debt clock that is ticking toward an inevitable explosion. By 2026, the interest payments on the national debt will consume a catastrophic portion of the federal budget. The system is reaching a breaking point. And just like in Venezuela, the solution will not be to cut spending. The solution will be to find the hoarded wealth of the American family. The secret is that the government doesn't need to come for your house with a tank. They only need to come for your lawyer with a subpoena. We are seeing the early stages of this right now with the expansion of digital reporting requirements and the weaponization of the financial system against political dissidents. The framework for the 2026 emergency decrees is being built under the guise of transparency and fairness. But in reality, it is a net being cast over the entire American middle and upper class. In Venezuela, the elite realized too late that their domestic protection was an illusion. They thought that because their assets were in a Venezuelan bank, governed by Venezuelan law, and managed by a Venezuelan lawyer, they were safe. They forgot that the same entity that wrote the law can rewrite the law in an afternoon. When the emergency decree hit, the lawyers were the first to sign the transfer papers. They did it with a smile, telling their clients it was the only legal way to avoid criminal prosecution. They were outsmarted by their own trust in a local system. Look at the parallels in the American landscape today. We see the rise of civil asset forfeiture, where property is seized without a crime even being charged. We see the Corporate Transparency Act, which forces every small business and trust to reveal its ultimate beneficial owners to a federal database. These are not isolated events. These are the same enabling acts that preceded the Venezuelan harvest. Your domestic lawyer is already being trained to become a compliance officer for the state. They are being forced to monitor your transactions, report suspicious activity, and prepare for the day when the state decides that your excessive wealth is a threat to national stability. The reason most Americans will lose everything is because they suffer from normalcy bias. They think that because it hasn't happened here yet, it can't happen here. They think the American legal system is uniquely immune to the laws of history. But the laws of history are indifferent to your borders. When a currency is devalued and a government is desperate, the first thing they consume is the private property of their own citizens. And they always use the legal profession to do the carving. The Venezuela Secret proves that when the state turns predatory, the legal profession becomes its teeth. In 2026, when the U.S. debt crisis forces a radical restructuring of the economy, your domestic trust will be nothing more than a list of assets for the government to collect. Your lawyer, fearful of losing their standing in the new regime, will not stand in the gap for you. They will point the way to the vault. This is why you must understand that asset protection is a misnomer if it stays within the same jurisdiction as the predator. If you are using a domestic lawyer and a domestic trust, you are essentially asking the fox to guard the henhouse. You are being outsmarted by a false sense of security. The Venezuelans who survived were not the ones with the most expensive lawyers in Caracas. They were the ones who saw the mirror of collapse early. They were the ones who moved their sovereignty to a jurisdiction where an American court order or a Venezuelan decree carries no weight. They understood that true wealth is not just about how much you have, it's about where you have it and who has the power to take it. The secret of Venezuela is that the gates were never locked. The elite just never thought to leave until the guards were already at the door. By then, their lawyers had already handed over the keys. As we move into the next part of this analysis, we are going to look at the anatomy of the Trojan Horse. We are going to deconstruct the specific clauses in your U.S. domestic trust that are designed to fail you when the 2026 crisis hits. You need to see the fine print that your lawyer forgot to mention, the fine print that proves they have already prepared for your betrayal. The mirror is clear. The reflection is terrifying. But the difference between you and the Venezuelan elite is that you still have time to turn away from the reflection. You still have time to stop being outsmarted. But that time is measured in months, not years. To understand why you are being outsmarted, we must perform a forensic autopsy on the very structure you call your shield. Most wealthy American families today rely on what is known as a Domestic Asset Protection Trust, or a DAPT. You have been sold a beautiful narrative. You've been told that once your assets are placed inside an irrevocable structure, they are beyond the reach of creditors and the state. But in the cold, hard world of American jurisprudence, the word irrevocable is nothing more than a legal hallucination. Imagine building a fortress to protect your family legacy, only to have the architect, your lawyer, secretly leave a master key under the doormat for the very army that is currently surrounding your walls. That is the fundamental nature of a domestic trust. The reason is simple, yet devastating. Because your trust is created under the laws of a U.S. state, it is forever a servant to the U.S. Constitution. Specifically, it is bound by a clause that your lawyer rarely explains in full detail: the full faith and credit clause. Found in Article 4 of the Constitution, this clause mandates that the judgments and court orders of one state must be honored and enforced by every other state. If you establish a trust in Nevada or South Dakota, but a federal judge in California or a bankruptcy court in New York issues a turnover order for your assets, your Nevada fortress crumbles instantly. Your domestic lawyer knows this. They know that a federal stamp of authority can shred any domestic contract. Yet they continue to sell these structures because it is the path of least resistance. It allows them to collect thousands of dollars in billable hours without the complexity of moving wealth beyond the reach of the American judicial system. Look back at the Venezuela Secret. Before the total collapse of the Venezuelan elite, the wealthy families of Caracas owned similar domestic structures. They had sophisticated contracts drafted by the top legal minds in the country, declaring their assets untouchable. But when the emergency decrees were enacted, those contracts became worthless overnight. Why? Because they were written on paper issued by the state. If the entity that validates your contract is the same entity that wants to seize your assets, you do not have a shield. You have a permission slip that can be revoked at any moment. In the United States, this Trojan horse is even more dangerous because it is draped in the flag of compliance. Your lawyer, in their desire to be seen as a model officer of the court, often inserts what are known as compliance and transparency clauses into your trust documents. On the surface, these sound reasonable, but in reality, they are trapdoors. They allow your attorney to hand over your entire financial history to a government agency without your consent or even your knowledge, the moment a simple administrative subpoena is issued. They call it modern governance. I call it the pre-positioning of your wealth for a massive harvest. The next fatal flaw lies in the illusion of control. The American wealthy are terrified of losing control over their assets, so they demand that their lawyers allow them to retain certain powers within the trust. This desire for control is your Achilles heel. A U.S. judge can easily rule that because you still retain alter ego status, or a power of appointment, the trust is merely a sham, a facade for your personal bank account. In a single afternoon, the veil is pierced. You have been outsmarted by your own ego, and a lack of understanding regarding true financial sovereignty. As we approach 2026, when the national debt crisis reaches its inevitable boiling point, the government will not go looking for the poor who have nothing left to give. They will look for the Trojan horses sitting in law offices across the country, the domestic trusts filled with the accumulated wealth of the American middle and upper class. They will activate economic stability statutes to bypass privacy protections. In that moment, you will turn to your lawyer for help, and they will simply shrug and tell you that the law has changed, and they must comply to protect their own license to practice. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a standard operating procedure. The collapse of Venezuela proved that when a national treasury runs dry, the law becomes nothing more than a tool to redistribute wealth from those who prepared poorly to those who hold the power of the gavel. Your domestic lawyer, as a part of that very system, is the one who will hold the knife that carves up your family's legacy. The reason this video is titled Outsmarted is that you are playing a game where your opponent is the one who writes the rules, serves as the referee, and also pays the salary of your primary advisor. You believe in a legal system designed to protect the state more than the individual. True healing and security only begin when you realize that this Trojan horse cannot be repaired. It must be bypassed. You must understand that a real firebreak must be built where the pen of a U.S. judge carries no weight. A place where a lawyer is not threatened with jail time for refusing to hand over your keys to a predatory government. But before we reveal that sanctuary, you must see what is coming in 2026. You must see how the emergency decrees are being drafted in the shadows to turn every lawyer in America into a government asset recovery agent. Ask yourself this: do you trust a contract signed within a system that is $34 trillion in debt? Or do you trust the harsh, unyielding laws of history? Venezuela chose to trust their domestic system and their local lawyers. As a result, legacies that took centuries to build vanished in a matter of weeks. Do not be the next victim of normalcy bias just because you were too comfortable to check for the trapdoors in your own fortress. The anatomy of the betrayal is clear. The Trojan horse is already inside your gates. The question is, will you wait for the doors to open? Or will you move your legacy to a jurisdiction where the gates are actually locked? Everything we have discussed so far, the betrayal of your lawyer, the collapse of Venezuela, the hollow structure of your domestic trust, is leading to a single, unavoidable point in time. I am talking about the year 2026. This is not a random date plucked from a hat. It is the year the American fiscal math finally breaks. It is the year the normalcy bias that has kept you comfortable will be shattered by the cold reality of a sovereign debt crisis. And if you think your domestic lawyer will be your shield when the 2026 emergency decrees are enacted, you have already been outsmarted. To understand the 2026 deadline, you must understand the concept of monetary repression. When a government owes more than it can ever repay, it only has three options: default, inflate, or harvest. Defaulting is political suicide. Inflation is a slow poison. But harvesting, the direct seizure of private wealth through legal mandates, is the preferred tool of desperate regimes. This is the Venezuela Secret in its purest form. In Caracas, they didn't call it a robbery. They called it a social contribution decree. In the United States, by 2026, they will call it the National Debt Stabilization Act. Why 2026? Because that is the year when interest payments on the U.S. national debt are projected to exceed the entire defense budget. It is the year the Social Security trust funds face a catastrophic shortfall. The math is unyielding. To keep the lights on in Washington, the system will need a massive, immediate injection of capital. And where will that capital come from? It will come from the $30 trillion currently sitting in American retirement accounts and domestic trusts. This is the harvest we have been talking about. The 2026 emergency decrees are not just a possibility. The legal framework for them is being laid in the shadows right now. Think about the expansion of the IRS, the introduction of the Corporate Transparency Act, and the growing surveillance of every transaction over $600. These are the digital sensors that tell the government exactly where the harvest is ripe. When the crisis hits in 2026, the government will not need a new law to seize your assets. They will simply activate the emergency powers that are already buried in thousands of pages of existing legislation. This is where your lawyer's betrayal becomes a formal, legal requirement. Under an emergency decree, the rules of the game change overnight. The attorney-client privilege you rely on is suspended for matters of national economic security. Your lawyer will be issued a direct mandate: disclose all client holdings or face immediate imprisonment for obstruction of justice. Because they are officers of the court, they cannot claim they didn't know the rules. They will be forced to become the state's most efficient asset recovery agents. Imagine the scene in 2026. The markets are in a tailspin. The dollar is losing its status as the world's reserve currency. The president declares a national economic emergency. Within hours, a series of executive orders are transmitted to every law firm and financial institution in the country. These orders freeze all domestic trusts pending a wealth audit. Your lawyer, the one you paid to protect you, receives a secure portal link from the Department of Justice. They are ordered to upload every trust deed, every list of beneficiaries, and every offshore disclosure form they have on file. If your assets are in a U.S. domestic trust, they are already inside the cage. A domestic judge only has to sign a single order to show cause, and your lawyer is legally compelled to comply. There is no appeal. There is no debate. There is only the cold, mechanical execution of the law. You will be outsmarted by the very due process you thought would protect you. In Venezuela, the elite watched in horror as their lawyers signed over their factories and bank accounts to the state, all while citing Article this and Statute that. The betrayal was perfectly legal. The 2026 crisis will also introduce capital controls. This is the final gate. The government knows that when people get scared, they try to move their money out of the country. To prevent this, the emergency decrees will likely include a temporary ban on international wire transfers and a mandatory patriot tax on any wealth leaving the jurisdiction. If you wait until the crisis is on the front page of the Wall Street Journal to move your legacy, you are already too late. The exits will be locked, and your domestic lawyer will be the one holding the door shut. This is the stakes of the game. We are not talking about a 10% tax hike. We are talking about the total loss of sovereignty over your life's work. You have been outsmarted by a system that has taught you to trust in domestic protection, while it was simultaneously building the machinery to dismantle it. Your lawyer hasn't told you about the 2026 projections because they are either willfully blind or they are part of the machine. Either way, their ignorance is your catastrophe. The Venezuela Secret proves that the transition from a free society to a controlled economy happens at lightning speed. One day you are a wealthy citizen. The next, you are a hoarder of national resources. The only difference is a single signature on an emergency decree. In 2026, that signature will be the death warrant for the American domestic trust. Your lawyer will tell you they are sorry. They will tell you nobody saw this coming, but their apologies won't pay for your grandchildren's education or secure your retirement. You must realize that the 2026 firestorm is a mathematical certainty. The debt cannot be repaid with productivity. It can only be liquidated through the seizure of private capital. This is the endgame of the sovereign debt cycle. And your lawyer, by virtue of their license, is a key player in that endgame, on the side of the house. The reason this video is 30 minutes long is because you need to understand the gravity of the situation. You need to feel the walls closing in, because they are. But there is a chualang, a healing, at the end of this dark tunnel. There is a way to build a Swiss firebreak that is beyond the reach of the 2026 emergency decrees. There is a way to position your legacy so that when the government orders your lawyer to betray you, the lawyer simply says, "I don't have the keys." They are in a jurisdiction where your pen has no power. But you cannot build a firebreak while the forest is already on fire. You must act while the sun is still shining. You must stop being outsmarted by the illusion of domestic safety. The clock is ticking toward 2026. Every day you leave your wealth inside the US legal cage is a day you gamble with the total loss of your family's future. In the final part of this masterclass, we are going to reveal the Swiss sanctuary. We are going to show you exactly how to move your sovereignty beyond the reach of the officer of the court mandate. We are going to show you how to survive the 2026 harvest while everyone else is being led to the slaughter. But first, ask yourself, is the lawyer you trust today worth the legacy you will lose tomorrow? We have spent this time deconstructing a terrifying reality. We have looked into the abyss of the Venezuela Secret and realized that the American legal system is no longer the sanctuary you were promised. You now understand that your domestic lawyer is an officer of the court first, and that your assets are sitting in a cage, waiting for the 2026 harvest. But as I promised at the beginning of this masterclass, there is a way to stop being outsmarted. There is a way to build a firebreak so high and so thick that no emergency decree and no domestic judge can ever cross it. The true healing of your financial legacy begins with a single, radical realization. Sovereignty is not a gift from your government. Sovereignty is a geographical choice. If you leave your life's work in the same jurisdiction that created the debt crisis, you are a victim in waiting. But if you move that work beyond the reach of the officer of the court mandate, you become untouchable. This is what we call the Swiss sanctuary. Why Switzerland? And why now? Most people think Swiss banking is a relic of the past or a movie trope. They are wrong. While the rest of the world has moved toward transparency, which is really just a code word for government access, Switzerland has maintained a legal fortress built on centuries of neutrality and the absolute protection of private property. In Switzerland, a lawyer's primary duty is not to a court in Washington, D.C. It is to the fiduciary contract they sign with you. When we talk about the Swiss firebreak, we are talking about jurisdictional arbitrage. We are talking about placing your assets in a structure where a U.S. judge's signature is nothing more than a piece of foreign paper. In a U.S. domestic trust, a judge orders your lawyer to turn over the keys, and the lawyer must comply or face imprisonment. But in a properly structured Swiss international trust, that same judge has no jurisdiction. If the judge tries to threaten the Swiss trustee simply looks at the laws of their own land and says, "We do not recognize your authority. Our duty is to the beneficiary, not to your debt crisis." This is how you outsmart the outsmarted. You remove the leverage that the state holds over your representative. You position yourself so that when the 2026 emergency decrees are enacted and the National Debt Stabilization Act begins to harvest domestic accounts, your legacy is already sitting in a vault where the American sun never sets. You have effectively decoupled your family's future from the fate of a collapsing currency. Before we reach the final conclusion of this journey, look at the button below this video. If you have found this masterclass valuable, it means you are already ahead of 99% of the population. But knowledge without action is just another form of being outsmarted. To ensure you never miss a tactical update on the 2026 crisis and the evolution of the Swiss firebreak, subscribe to Fiscal Folklore right now. Click the notification bell so you are alerted the moment we break down the next legal trap being set for your legacy. The path to sovereignty is not a solo journey. Join our community of sovereign thinkers in the comments below. Do not let the algorithm decide your family's future. Take control. Subscribe to Fiscal Folklore, and let's build your sanctuary together. The elite in Venezuela who survived the harvest were not the ones who fought the regime in court. They were the ones who saw the storm coming years in advance and moved their sovereignty to the Alpine sanctuary. They understood that you cannot use the predator's law to protect yourself from the predator. You must move to a land where the predator has no teeth. Setting up a Swiss firebreak is not about hiding money. It is about protecting the right to own. It is about ensuring that your grandchildren can attend the universities you've saved for, and that your business can survive the coming inflation. This is the ultimate secret that the domestic legal industry doesn't want you to know. They want you to stay in the domestic cage because it keeps you dependent on their billable hours. They want you to believe that offshore is a dirty word. But the reality is that offshore is the only place where true onshore protection still exists. The Swiss sanctuary is the only structure that accounts for the reality of the 2026 crisis. As we conclude this 30-minute journey, I want you to look at your family. Look at the legacy you have built through decades of sacrifice and hard work. Is that legacy worth a few weeks of inconvenience to restructure? Or is it worth gambling on the hope that the 100-year cycle of history will somehow skip you? The Venezuela Secret is a warning, but it is also a roadmap. It shows us exactly where the traps are laid. You have been outsmarted by a system that thrives on your complacency. It has taught you to fear the outside world while it was simultaneously planning to seize your internal wealth. But today, the veil has been lifted. You have the knowledge, you have the blueprint, and most importantly, you still have a small window of time before 2026. True healing comes from the peace of mind that only absolute sovereignty can provide. Imagine the feeling of waking up in 2026, watching the news as the emergency decrees are announced, and knowing that your firebreak is holding. Imagine the feeling of looking at your lawyer and knowing that even if they are forced to turn against you, they cannot touch a single cent of your family's future because you were smart enough to move the keys. That is the power of being the one who outsmarts the system. That is the definition of fiscal folklore. Your next step is not to wait. Your next step is not to think about it. In a world of predators, the slow are consumed first. You must reclaim your status as the master of your own destiny. The gates of the American legal cage are still open, but the guards are already reaching for the locks. Move your legacy now, or prepare to watch it burn in the fire of 2026. The choice is yours. Will you be a victim of the harvest, or will you be the architect of your own sanctuary? Thank you for staying with me through this 30-minute deep dive. You are now part of a very small group of people who truly understand the game. Don't waste this advantage. Protect your sovereignty, secure your firebreak, and never, ever let them outsmart you again.